goes out to a brother who gave much love to the music. He gets much respect. Can you dig it?
In 2025, amid changes in the way the U.S. government operated during the first year of Donald Trump's second term, some began to argue the United States was beginning to resemble a dual state. This idea received increased attention after Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson cited the dual state in a dissenting opinion on Trump versus CASA. And you ask yourself, the dual state, what is that? What is the dual state? Well, I'll tell you. Between 1936 and 1938, a German Jewish lawyer named Ernest Frankel wrote a book, and the original title was Der Doppelstaat, also known as the dual state. Now, this book represents one of the most sophisticated contemporary analysis of totalitarian rule and remains a foundational text in understanding authoritarian regimes. The book's central thesis introduces the concept of the dual state, arguing that Nazi Germany operated simultaneously as two distinct systems: the normative state, which continued to function according to established laws and regulations, and the prerogative state, which exercised arbitrary power unconstrained by legal norms. But I'm here to tell you, because I've been saying to you that we have been in a civil war for quite a long time. Civil war in America will not look like Gettysburg. It will look more like Sarajevo or Northern Ireland, okay? Think about what I'm saying here. It's not going to look like Gettysburg. Now, I'm pulling some excerpts from Explaining History podcast, and I grabbed this one because I thought it was some interesting stuff. Not all the content here is coming from there, but I did want to actually talk about the Civil War because it's pretty apparent that it's going on. Okay? And so I'd like to start out with the reality of this. Renee Good and Alex Preddy were not just victims of bad policing. They are victims of a colonial mindset turned inward. The rhetoric of the Great Replacement espoused figures on the Trump right, and it frames the domestic population as a battleground. Let me repeat. It frames the domestic population as a battleground. Whether you like it or not, a civil war is taking place, and you are watching a dual state, and it's happening. In Trump's worldview, parts of the citizenry are viewed not as rights-bearing individuals, but as an occupying force or a demographic threat that must be cleansed. Let me repeat that. In Trump's worldview, parts of the citizenry are viewed not as rights-bearing individuals, but as an occupying force or demographic threat that must be cleansed. Very much like Nazi rhetoric. W.E.B. Du Bois called it the psychological wage of whiteness. Du Bois noted that poor white workers in Reconstruction South were willing to accept low wages and economic exploitation in exchange for public and psychological wage, the status of being white, or of being not black and of being aligned with the dominant caste. And I've been talking about it, that these guys are looking to be acknowledged by the power. And I have a friend that, when we used to do our exercise, talked about how it appeared that a lot of the southern states had sold out to the corporate overlords. And they believe we all should sell out to the corporate overlords. And so one way to create that division is that you bring up the argument or the cancer of race back into American society, because we were starting to get, chip away at it and chip away at it and chip away at it. But the powers that be, I'm assuming, decided we are not divided enough. That it's time to move in a whole different direction, away from democracy and into authoritarianism. But who's going to be in control? The one good thing I can tell you about this is they still have battles within their own groups. Yeah, like 3, 4 factions, they're going at it. However, eventually, when the power is consolidated, and that's the scary thing about authoritarianism, about consolidating power, and I think Miss Jane Fonda did her own PSA on this, you only have so long to act. And if you don't, you're done. So Du Bois goes on to say, again, I shouldn't say goes on to say, I'm just going to restate what he said. Du Bois noted that poor white workers in Reconstruction South were willing to accept low wages and economic exploitation in exchange for a public and psychological wage, the status of being white, of not being black, and of being aligned with the dominant caste. In the current era of neoliberal collapse, that economic bargain has frayed. The material wage of American working class has stagnated for 50 years. The social safety net has been shredded. What remains is the psychological wage, which is, as Du Bois was telling us, it is the wage of whiteness, the psychological wage of whiteness. Okay? So think about this. The Trump movement offers its adherents a restoration of status. It promises the state will use its monopoly on violence. It promises that the state will use its monopoly on violence, which we're seeing right now, death of Alex Preddy and Renee Good and other people. Promises that the state will use its monopoly on violence to enforce racial hierarchy. And man, doesn't that just fit the Nazis and the Klan? And man, they love that. They've been trying to, eat that soup for a long time. And, in the 70s, because they were making the state look bad, they had to get smacked back a little bit. Well, Trump has the dogs whistles. He's got the dog whistles going, and he's definitely let the dogs out. Because who do you have? Stephen Miller or other ideologues defend the actions of ICE. They are signaling to their base that the state is still theirs. Cruelty is not a byproduct. It is the point. So when we talk about, are we going to have a trial? Are we going to look into these shootings? The press is BS, man. Most of these guys are very educated, and they know exactly what they're seeing. They're seeing the dual state. There's a lot of these guys, they probably had history as a minor. They took history. They understand this looks very much like Nazi Germany. And, violence is the point. Those aren't accidental shootings. We're not talking to, we're trying to get these guys prosecuted. They're not going to prosecute these guys. They're not going to prosecute these guys, unless everybody takes to the streets. And Trump has his version of the reign of terror, but France had their reign of terror during the revolution, and the people had enough, and they started going after, they started going after royalty and politicians and people in high places and giving them the guillotine. Okay. So the dual state, we're talking about normative state versus the prerogative state. Okay. So let's talk about what they are. Okay. The normative state and prerogative state are two contrasting concepts in political theory. Okay. Two contrasting concepts in political theory. Normative state refers to a government that operates within a set of established norms, rules, and laws. It is characterized by the rule of law. We've heard that all the time. Respect for individual rights and the separation of powers. The primary goal of the normative state is to ensure justice, equality, and the protection of citizens' rights. On the other hand, the prerogative state is a government that possesses extensive discretionary powers and can act outside the boundaries of established norms and laws. In other words, if Trump wakes up on one side of the bed and decides that he wants to do X, Y, and Z, that's what he does. It's prerogative, right? But if Bobby Brown said, my prerogative, do what I want to do, right? That's what Bobby Brown said. Well, that's what Trump-Olympicus is saying, okay? All right, so prerogative state is often associated with authoritarian regimes or states of emergency. We've been hearing a lot of that, where the government can suspend civil liberties and make decisions based on its own judgment, while a normative state emphasizes the importance of legal and moral principles. A prerogative state prioritizes the government's authority and the need for swift action in exceptional circumstances. And so, here's the thing. Whatever the orange man thinks is an exceptional circumstance will be an exceptional circumstance. So right now, because the Supreme Court has pretty much said that he can't go to jail while being the president, he can do whatever he wants. And nobody's going to stop him unless everybody starts to protest, unless everybody starts to show dissent. And if you fragment it, the people have no power. And this is why they push for separation. They try to find these hot buttons to get everybody attacking each other. And America has been plagued with the cancer of racial discrimination since its inception. So that's a real easy button to push, because these morons aren't doing anything, but they're just sitting around with their guns and their TV dinners, just waiting for somebody to say, all right, go kill somebody. Absolutely insane, but it is. It's true. And so these guys now have, guess what? They have the power. Yes, they have the power. As long as they are useful to these power-seeking folks, these guys have the power that they've always wanted. And that was to be as racist and hateful and mean and barbaric and heinous as they could possibly be until they go off the cliff. Nazi Germany went absolutely crazy. That was one reason why the war ended. They went crazy. They started eating themselves. All this negative stuff, people eat themselves, and yeah, Russia did a lot. Russia did a lot of things during World War II. They were on the wrong side. Hitler betrays them and basically had the Russians eating each other. Literally, they were, but Russia is so massive, so big, that Stalin knew how to move massive populations and build industry at the same time, because Germany had to overcome the terrain. There was just so many things that Hitler miscalculated when he decided to turn on the Russians. We know Churchill didn't like the Russians. But I'll tell you what, I bet you he was loving them then. England and Russia, you think the United States and Russia has been an issue? The only issue that the United States had with Russia was that when the powers that be at the time needed an enemy, Russia made a great enemy for them. And maybe the leaders, are two peas in a pod in a sense, even though one is supposed to be about communism, the other one's supposed to be about a republic that's striving to be a democracy. Okay. So here's quick comparisons on normative state and prerogative state. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I just wanted you to get the message. So when you look at the normative state, so we did the definition. Normative state is a state that operates based on established norms, laws, and principles. So yeah, you're going through social science and political science all over again. The prerogative state is a state that exercises discretionary power and authority. We're seeing a lot of that, discretionary power and authority. The source of authority for the normative state is derived from the consent of the government, which is supposed to be adhering to the Constitution, supporting the Constitution. When you get into the prerogative state, authority is derived from the ruler or governing body. And so the first one, which was the normative state, authority is derived from the consent of the governed. The consent of the governed, which is the people. When you get into the prerogative, authority is derived from the ruler or a governing body, meaning disenfranchisement from the people are disenfranchised from their government or separated from their government. When we get into rule and law comparison, the normative state emphasizes the importance of following established laws and legal procedures. When you get in the prerogative state, it may prioritize the ruler's discretion over strict adherence to laws. Checks and balances for the normative state. Power is distributed among different branches of government to prevent abuse of authority. Prerogative state, the checks and balances may have limited or no checks on the ruler's power. So you see people saying that we don't want any kings. No kings. When you see these protests, no kings. And this is what they're talking about. When it comes to accountability, the normative state, the government officials are accountable to the people and the rule of law. That's the normative state. That's the state that we're trying to be in. When you get into the prerogative state, accountability may be limited or absent. Accountability may be limited or absent. This administration has no accountability whatsoever. And that's pretty obvious, and that's a dangerous thing because you put a man who has a mentality that's beneath a fifth grader in charge. And what's he doing? He's tearing up everything. That's what he's doing. And when it comes to political stability in the normative state, stability is achieved through adherence to established norms and laws. And for the prerogative state, stability may rely on the ruler's ability to maintain control. And that's what we're watching. So I'm not trying to bore you with all these concepts, but we kind of needed to go back to school. We needed to see what it is that we're actually dealing with. So I'm not going to take you into all the whys and wherefores because we already did this. So this one's actually going to be a short show. But we're in a dual state. The Supreme Court has already, for the record, stated we're in a dual state. We're in a civil war. We've been in a civil war for quite some time. And no, it's not going to look like Gettysburg. It will look more like Sarajevo. Okay. And if you guys don't know anything about that, maybe you need to actually research this. Okay. And we could actually cite, other examples, but I think this is good. So I'm not going to keep you. All I have to say is this. Right now, we are looking like Northern Ireland, and some of you guys are too young to remember when Ireland and England were going at it, and the bombs, and the famous drink is the Irish car bomb. Well, that's because there was a lot of Irish car bombs going off all over Ireland and England. And it was really 9/11 that there were substantial attempts at peace, and they were almost there. There was a peace accord that was signed between the two, but that was kind of going back and forth. And then 9/11 went down, and George Bush signaled to everybody that if you're not on our side, and that would be England and the United States, then you are considered a terrorist. And so bottom line is George Bush's threat really calm the Ireland and English conflict, because the United States was going to get involved in that and treat them as terrorists. And Ireland had a relationship with the United States, and they didn't want the United States treating them like terrorists. So, like I said, I'm not going to keep you too long today. We're talking about the dual state. We're seeing this. We're in a civil war. Trump is about authoritarian rule. And I will go back to the Epstein files. That film is still out there. That film was taken. When they originally went to Epstein's place, they saw all the film, but they didn't have warrants. This is the story. And so it took them 6 days to get the warrants. And when they got the warrants, finally, when they came back, all the film is gone. Somebody took the film. Was it the Mossad, Israel? Was it the CIA? All the players, you know, it's all out there. All this information is out there. Bottom line is, you're not going to know what happened. And it's just like the whole Kennedy thing. You're not supposed to know. It's like MK Ultra and COINTELPRO. You guys don't know this stuff. It's time to start studying it. But we're in a civil war. This country's falling apart. It is really falling apart. You got people that are leaving. They're trying to get out. Everybody's thinking about getting out because it's coming down. At some point, we will look like Nazi Germany even more. They're building the prisons. They're building the high level, security surveillance systems. They've got the AI and computers, androids. All of these things are going on. And the brainwashing is increased exponentially. All I can say is this: if we want to be a better country, then we're going to need to unite, and we need to stop them right now. If not, they're going to have their way. And it's not looking good right now for justice. It's not looking good for democracy, because the real criminals are in charge right now, where the inmates are absolutely running the asylum. I know Gil Scott-Heron was talking about, Bush, and his brood as the inmates running the asylum. But if he could see this, this is it. I'm Michael P. America. I am out of here.